You're lying in bed, eyes heavy, and your mind drifts to a time when England was ruled not by kings, but by a woman with a neck ruff big enough to catch rain and an attitude sharp enough to cut diamonds. The fire crackles, the room is dim, and somewhere in the folds of history, Queen Elizabeth I sharpens her wit like a dagger. You probably won't make it through this day. That's not a threat, it's just a gentle warning. You've wandered into a world of poisoned goblets, royal plots, and ruffled sleeves that conceal secrets. But don't worry. We're not here to stress you out, we're here to gently bore you to sleep with velvet and vengeance. Before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe if you find yourself yawning in Elizabethan English by the end. And drop a comment, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. We love knowing when you surrender to sleep. Now let's ease into tonight's journey. You stand in the halls of Hatfield House. It's chilly, drafty, and smells faintly of ink and ambition. You're 10 years old, or at least you feel that way in this memory. Elizabeth is here 2x16, studying Latin by candlelight, pretending not to listen as her future is whispered in every corridor. Here's your major historical fact. Elizabeth I was declared illegitimate after her mother, Anne Boleyn was executed by her father, Henry VIII. That's a bit of a family icebreaker. Your obscure cultural tidbit. Elizabeth's tutors often tested her with word games in multiple languages before breakfast, because what's a childhood without a little pre-dawn Greek? Outside, the trees rustle. Inside, the servants lower their eyes. Even at 16, Elizabeth knows how to command a room by simply existing in it. You, meanwhile, are just hoping someone will invent central heating. Historians still debate whether Elizabeth truly believed she'd ever be queen or whether she simply prepared, just in case the stars aligned and everyone else died conveniently. She looks up from her book, catches your gaze, and smirks, as if to say, "Don't get too comfortable." The morning mist clings to the windows like gossip. You trail behind Elizabeth as she walks the gardens of Hampton Court. She's older now, sharper, but that smirk is still shaped by years of being underestimated. You hear footsteps behind you, a courtier bearing yet another marriage proposal from yet another desperate nobleman. Elizabeth accepts the scroll with all the enthusiasm of someone handed a dead pigeon. Your historical fact for today. Elizabeth famously refused to marry, earning her the nickname the Virgin Queen. This wasn't just romantic stubbornness, it was political brilliance. Cultural tidbit. In her later years, Elizabeth's portraits often included symbols like moons and pearls to reinforce her image as pure, eternal, and slightly terrifying. She unrolls the scroll, skims it, and snorts. "Tell Lord Dolphus," she says without looking up, "that I am already married to England." The courtier bows, confused but obedient. You walk with her a while, past rose bushes that were probably named after someone executed last week, past fountains that haven't worked since Henry broke them in a tantrum. Historians still debate whether Elizabeth truly avoided love or whether she had her heart broken too early to ever try again. She stops beneath a tree, plucks a blossom, and tucks it behind your ear. "Power," she whispers, "is the finest perfume." Then she walks on, leaving you wondering how she always knows exactly what to say, even when she shouldn't. It's dusk now, and you're standing in the back of a grand hall at court. The air smells of roasted meat, candle wax, and subtle panic. Musicians play something lively on lutes, but the rhythm keeps stumbling as if even the instruments are nervous. Elizabeth sits on her throne, watching everything. She doesn't blink much. You wonder if blinking is considered weak in royal circles. A foreign ambassador bows before her. His velvet sleeves are ridiculous, his accent thicker than he presents a gifter, jeweled mirror said to reflect true beauty. Here's your historical fact. Elizabeth loved pageantry and symbolism. Every gesture at court was a calculated move on a political chessboard. Obscure tidbit. She banned the color purple at court for a time, because a rival noblewoman wore it too confidently. She takes the mirror, holds it up, and smiles faintly. "Tell your queen," she says, "that beauty is truth, and mine is quite loyal." The ambassador smiles. Everyone claps, except for the lute player, who just snapped a string. You move quietly along the edge of the room, noticing how even the walls seem to lean in when Elizabeth speaks. She doesn't need to. Historians still debate how much of her charisma was rehearsed and how much was pure instinct. Later that night, you find her alone in the gallery, practicing a speech to herself. You're not sure if it's for Parliament, or just to silence her own thoughts. The moonlight hits her face, and for a moment, she looks very young. Then she turns, sees you, and just says, "Well, was it convincing?" You nod. Of course it was. Morning again. This time you're at Greenwich Palace. The ceiling is painted with stars, which feels a bit optimistic for a place that smells mostly of politics and perfume. Elizabeth is in her chambers, being dressed. Not by choice, this is a full operation. Corsets, lace, layers of embroidered fabric, and enough jewels to trigger a minor back injury. Today's historical fact. Elizabeth's image was tightly controlled. Portraits were edited, literally painted over to preserve her eternal youth. Even as her teeth blackened and her hair thinned, the image remained flawless. Obscure tidbit. She owned over 3,000 dresses, and Worley-based makeup so thick, She once scared a dog into barking. You watch silently as her ladies fuss. One whispers something about a foreign visitor arriving soon. Elizabeth doesn't react except to say, "Then let him wait until I'm perfect." The procession begins. You follow her through the palace halls, watching how everyone bows just a bit too low. She enters the throne room like a storm in pearls. The morning fog clings to your sleeves as you wander through the corridors of Whitehall Palace. Everything here smells faintly of beeswax, ambition, and the kind of wood polish that probably hides bloodstain. You hear Elizabeth's footsteps echo ahead. Today, she's meeting with her Privy Council, a room full of men who are all older, grayer, and significantly more confused than they'd care to admit. You stand quietly by the wall, pretending not to notice that one of them just called another Your Majesty by accident. Elizabeth doesn't flinch. She raises one eyebrow and keeps going. Here's your major historical fact. Elizabeth's early reign was dominated by debates over marriage, succession, and religious reform. She famously delayed making major decisions, often frustrating her advisors, but this was calculated. Her hesitation wasn't indecision, it was strategy. Your obscure cultural tidbit for today. Elizabeth kept a pet African grey parrot named Popinjay who allegedly cursed in Latin. It's unclear if she trained it or if the bird simply picked up palace gossip. Either way, it had better Latin than most noblemen. The meeting drones on, arguments about Spain, money, the Pope, basically the usual. You watch Elizabeth twirl a signet ring around her finger, pretending to listen while silently choosing which lord she ignored tomorrow. She rises the council, but someone spills ink. Another tries to hand her a proposal written in sonnet form. She leaves without acknowledging either. Historians still debate whether Elizabeth's refusal to marry was based more on trauma, independence, or the strategic benefits of being single in a male-dominated world. Either way, you can't help but notice Paula suits her. That night you join her in the gardens again. This time, she's laughing softly with a lady-in-waiting, quoting a poem she probably edited to make it sharper. You realize, for all her armor, she's still human, just not one to cross before breakfast. Let the moonlight settle on your shoulders like a velvet shawl. Tomorrow promises more questions, more suitors, and undoubtedly, more ink stains. You awaken to the sound of trumpets, not the joyful kind, more like the someone's being caught plotting treason kind. You rush toward the courtyard where a small crowd is gathered under the guise of admiring architecture. Elizabeth stands at the center, composed. As always, this morning's drama, one of her courtiers has been exchanging letters with Mary, Queen of Scots. Treasonous, maybe embarrassing, definitely. Here's your major historical fact. Elizabeth faced constant threats from Mary Stuart, who many Catholics viewed as the rightful queen. Their rivalry spanned decades and multiple assassination plots. Your obscure cultural tidbit. To decipher intercepted letters, Elizabeth's spymaster Francis Walsingham developed early forms of cryptography, one of which included lemon juice and sunlight. Apparently espionage came with a citrus twist. Elizabeth addresses the crowd. Her voice is calm, clear, and quietly terrifying. She says nothing outright accusatory, but everyone understands exactly who she's talking about. The accused courtier turns a shade paler than parchment. You retreat inside, overwhelmed by the mix of elegance and paranoia. In the hallway, you pass a tapestry depicting a hunt scene that looks suspiciously like a metaphor for the court itself. Historians still debate whether Elizabeth truly intended to execute Mary from the beginning or was reluctantly pushed into it by political necessity. What's clear, though, is that she didn't relish it. Not openly. Later that evening, you find Elizabeth at her writing desk. She's penning a letter in French, sipping wine from a glass so fragile you're afraid to look at it too hard. She asks her secretary to bring her the newest poems by Spenser, then sighs deeply. There's a loneliness to power one only candlelight and poetry seem to soften. You step back into the shadows, letting her finish her letter in peace. Outside, the wind carries whispers across the battlements. You wrap your cloak tighter, not sure if it's the cold or the weight of secrets that's made you shiver. It's a rare sunny morning in London, and you're in the palace stables, not because you particularly enjoy the smell of hay and horse, but because Elizabeth has decided it's time for a public ride through the city. Visibility, after all, is part of rule. Nothing reminds people you're in charge quite like parading past them on a well-groomed horse. Elizabeth's public appearances were strategic and frequent. She understood the power of image centuries before the age of Instagram. Her royal progresses through towns and villages weren't just ceremonial, they were political theater. Cultural tidbit. Elizabeth often wore lead-based makeup to maintain her iconic pale look. The downside, it slowly poisoned her. But hey, she looked fantastic under candlelight. As she mounts the horse with more grace than expected for someone wearing half a pound of pearls, you catch her eye. There's a flicker of amusement. She knows the crowd is watching, she knows they're judging, and she knows exactly how to control that judgment. The streets are lined with people. Children wave ribbons. Merchants bow so low they nearly fade. Somewhere, a baker shouts, "Long live the Queen," before immediately undercharging someone for a loaf of bread. The ride is slow, regal, and surprisingly soothing. Sunlight glints off her armor-stitched bodice. You spot someone tossing flowers. Another throws a note. Historians still debate how much Elizabeth's persona was a mask and how much was real. Did she truly believe in the virgin image she projected, or was it simply the safest mask to wear? Later, you find yourself back at the palace, brushing dust from your sleeves. A stable boy sneezes hay at you. Elizabeth passes, dismounting without assistance, her face unreadable. Visibility is control, she murmurs, mostly to herself. And with that, she vanishes into the corridor, leaving the smell of horse and roses behind. Rain again, because of course, the English sky doesn't so much pour as it sighs heavily in your direction. You're in the library, this time rows of ancient tomes, some of which haven't been opened since Henry VIII's last diet. Elizabeth is seated near the window, reading a manuscript on naval logistics. You try not to yawn. Here's your historical fact. Elizabeth's reign oversaw the defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588. It was a turning point in English history and secured her legacy as a capable and powerful monarch. Weird cultural tidbit. Some nobles believed storms were caused by witches. After the Armada's failure, a few Spanish survivors claimed English witches conjured the weather. Elizabeth neither confirmed nor denied. You sit across from her, flipping through a book on medicinal herbs. The illustrations are enthusiastic. One herb promises to cure melancholy, foot rot, and ungrateful nephews. Useful. A letter arrives. Elizabeth scans it. Her expression shifts only slightly, but you catch it. A merchant ship has returned from the Americas with tobacco and rumors. Both are equally irritating to the crown. She hands the letter to an aide. But keep the tobacco. Historians still debate how much Elizabeth knew about the darker aspects of colonial expansion. Her approval was often silent, but silenced, too, is a kind of answer. By evening, the rain softens. You sit by the hearth with a cup of something warm that tastes vaguely like pine. Elizabeth joins you, no crown, no armor, just a woman in velvet, staring into the fire. She begins quoting Virgil, then stops. Midline, too dramatic, she mutters. You smile. She doesn't. The fire crackles. Outside, the rain stops pretending and finally falls asleep. Historians still debate whether Elizabeth's vanity was genuine or a shield armor forged from rouge and artifice. The visitor arrives. Another prince, another offer. He stumbles through his speech, sweating profusely. Elizabeth listens, then thanks him, then immediately changes the subject to naval blockades. You can almost feel the poor prince deflate. That evening, she invites her closest ladies to read some. You sit in the corner, pretending not to cry at one of them. Elizabeth doesn't notice, or maybe she does, and chooses not to say anything. Grief, she murmurs, is best dressed in velvet and forgotten by morning. And with that, the day ends like all the others, with poetry, posture, and practiced solitude. The sun hasn't risen yet, but Elizabeth has. She's been awake for hours, pacing the tiled floors of her chambers like a lioness with too much on her mind and too little patience for breakfast. You try not to make noise as you shadow her from a respectful distance. Today is another round of court performances and diplomatic dances, starting with an ambassador from France who insists on kissing hands and speaking in riddles. Elizabeth responds in perfect French, smiles politely, then hands him a reply so sharp it could double as cutlery. Here's your major historical fact. Elizabeth was fluent in at least 6 languages, including Latin and Greek, which made her one of the most educated monarchs of her time. She often used her intellect as both armor and weapon. Your obscure cultural tidbit. In this era, it was considered trendy for nobles to dye their hair with saffron and alum to mimic Elizabeth's striking reddish-gold locks. The results were mixed, especially if the mixture was left out in the sun. The ambassador bows so low he nearly topples. Elizabeth nods once, and he's escorted away to go write a report that will somehow spin this encounter as a success. You follow her to the gallery, where she pretends to admire a painting while eavesdropping on gossip disguised as poetry. The courtiers are trying hard to impress, but Elizabeth has already read better verses in her laundry list. Historians still debate whether her theatrical persona, the Virgin Queen draped in pearls and prophecy, was her invention, or a collective hallucination fueled by flattery. What's certain is that she played the role to perfection. That night, she's unusually quiet. You sit with her by the hearth. She talks about constellations, lost friends, and the sound of wind against stained glass. You say nothing. And in that moment you realize silence can be its own kind of power. This morning brings rain, the kind that seeps into your shoes and soul. You trail behind Elizabeth through the palace chapel, its vaulted ceiling echoing every footstep like a whispered sermon. The sermon today, subtle politics masked as scripture. The bishop drones about obedience. Elizabeth's gaze flicks over the congregation like a candle searching for smoke. Here's your major historical fact. Elizabeth established the Elizabethan religious settlement, a delicate compromise meant to unify Protestants and Catholics under one Church of England. It wasn't perfect, but it prevented full-scale civil war. Your obscure cultural tidbit. Some devout Catholics still refuse to attend Anglican services. Instead, they held secret masses in private homes, sometimes under floorboards, sometimes behind false walls. Elizabeth's spies were very good at hide-and-seek. After the service, A young nobleman stumbles over his words while trying to compliment her necklace. Elizabeth responds with a question about Roman architecture that leaves him blinking like a confused owl. Later in the royal gardens, she walks alone. You notice how the rain clings to her gown but doesn't seem to touch her spirit. She stops under a yew tree and whispers a prayer, half Latin, half English. You pretend not to hear. Historians still debate how much of her faith was personal versus political. But standing here, you sense both in her the weight of expectation and the flicker of belief. That evening, she hosts a quiet supper. No music, no performance, just bread, wine, and conversation with a scholar who's brave enough to disagree with her. She smiles at that. And when the candles burn low and the rain turns to mist, you watch her rise and leave without a word. The empty chair still holds the shape of a queen who never quite sits still. The palace is quiet tonight, too quiet, even for Tudor standards. You walk softly down a hallway lined with portraits. The eyes follow you, of course. They always do. But one gaze stands out. Elizabeth's own, caught forever in oil and symbolism. One hand on a globe, the other on her stomach, which would never bear an heir. Here's your major historical fact. Elizabeth I never married and had no children, ending the Tudor dynasty. Her decision preserved her autonomy but created a looming question of succession that haunted her court. Obscure cultural tidbit. Elizabeth's wardrobe included gowns threaded with gold and perfumed gloves, laced with crushed rose petals and herbs not to impress, but to mask the not-so-pleasant smells of court life. Hygiene was more of a seasonal trend back then. Tonight, she writes again this time, a letter to the King of France. It's full of clever half-promises and diplomatic riddles. Her writing is neat, precise, and slightly mischievous. You wonder how many rulers fell in love with this script alone. In another wing, you pass a court musician plucking a tune on a lute, humming under his breath. The melody is familiar, it's been stuck in your head since you arrived, like Tudor-era elevator music. Historians still debate whether Elizabeth actually composed any music herself. Some credit her with lyrics, others with entire compositions. As usual, the truth is dressed in velvet ambiguity. You peek into the chapel. Candles flicker against stained glass. A lady in waiting kneels, whispering a prayer that's half devotion, half desperation. The palace runs on both. By the time you return to your room, Elizabeth's letter has already been dispatched by horseback. She wastes no time. Power sleeps lightly, if at all. You wake to the scent of lavender and the distant clatter of hooves. Today is a Progressive Royal road trip. You mount a horse that is clearly not thrilled about the situation, enjoying the glittering caravan winding through the countryside. Here's your major historical fact. Elizabeth's royal progresses were political theater on horseback. She traveled through towns to strengthen loyalty, inspect governance, and remind everyone, nobles and peasants alike, who wore the crown. Obscure tidbit. Elizabeth sometimes refused to visit certain noble households if they didn't meet her standards or if the plumbing was subpar. One poor lord was given just 2 days' notice to prepare for 300 guests. His goose never emotionally recovered. You ride past cheering villagers, their enthusiasm both genuine and carefully practiced. Children wave garlands. Bakers present loaves of bread shaped like crowns. A group of local musicians play something that sounds almost like music. Elizabeth stops to greet an elderly woman, touches a baby's cheek, accepts a velvet pouch filled with what you hope is something less perishable than cheese. Her smile is warm, her gaze calculating. This is a queen who can deliver justice and accept pastries in the same breath. Historians still debate whether these progresses were more about policy or PR. Either way, they worked. Her presence inspired loyalty in a way that parchment and proclamations never could. That evening, you camp near an abbey. Tents go up, fires flicker, and the court transforms the countryside into a temporary kingdom. Elizabeth sits beneath a canopy, drinking watered wine and reading aloud from Virgil, while her dog, a small fluffy thing named Saucy, sniffs your boot. Later, under a canopy of stars, someone begins to sing. The lyrics are about love, loss, and someone named Edmund who can't dance. You fall asleep wrapped in wool and candle smoke, with the Queen's voice echoing softly through the night air. Tomorrow, the road continues. But for now, the world holds still. Morning again, you stretch under a wool blanket that smells faintly of lavender and political schemes. The court is buzzing. Today marks the visit of foreign diplomats from France and the Holy Roman Empire, which means polished boots, exaggerated bows, and food that's mostly decorative. Elizabeth is in full regalia, rough-starched to architectural levels, her jewels making soft clinking noises as she moves. You'll follow her to the receiving chamber where the diplomats await, rehearsing their greetings like nervous actors. Here's your major historical fact. Elizabeth's foreign policy was a masterclass in balance. She played Catholic and Protestant nations against each other, managing to keep England relatively secure without marrying into any of their royal houses. Your obscure cultural tidbit. To impress visiting dignitaries, it wasn't unusual for courtiers to dye their beards strange colors or perfume their gloves. so strongly they left trails. One lord reportedly passed out from his own cologne. The French ambassador presents a gift on automaton shaped like a lion that growls when wound up. Elizabeth raises an eyebrow, strokes its brass head, and promptly names it Philip, after the Spanish king she didn't marry. You'll catch her eye, and she smirks. Historians still debate whether Elizabeth ever truly wanted peace, or whether she understood that a kingdom constantly poised for conflict was one harder to conquer. That night, the court holds a masquerade ball. Elizabeth doesn't dance, but she watches every mask, every move, every whispered comment. She sees it all. You dance once, awkwardly, then retreat to the shadows where it's safer. Just before midnight she turns to you and murmurs, "Power is the only lover that never strays." Then she's gone. You wake to find the palace wrapped in fog thick as stew. It muffles the sound of hooves, footsteps, and secrets. A servant tells you Elizabeth is in the chapel. You follow candlelight through damp corridors until you reach her. She kneels alone. No crown, no audience, just silence. Here's your major historical fact. Elizabeth was deeply spiritual, though private about her faith. She restored the Church of England, but kept many Catholic aesthetics to appease both sides. Your obscure cultural tidbit. Elizabeth had her own personal book of prayers, one she likely annotated herself. Some say she wrote little marginalia notes, like "Remember Mercia." You stay at a respectful distance as she prays. The moment feels intimate, timeless. For once, she isn't a monarch or a legend, just a woman hoping her choices were right. Historians still debate whether Elizabeth truly believed she was divinely appointed, or if that belief was armor she wore to survive the weight of her crown. Later, you return to the gardens, the same ones where this all began. The rosemary is blooming again, and the gardener, now bolder, finally dares to trim a hedge into the shape of a phoenix, Elizabeth's personal emblem. You sit on a stone bench and think about everything you've seen, the suitors, the spies, the silencers, and still, she remains flawed, fiery, fiercely alone, and somehow completely unshaken. A breeze stirs the trees. You close your eyes. Night deepens. The halls of Whitehall fall quiet, echoing only with the faint creak of wood and the slow drip of time. Candle flames sway gently, casting shadows that stretch like memories. You walk once more through the palace, slower now. The walls that once whispered schemes and ambitions now hum softly with rest. Behind one door, a lute leans in silence. Behind another, a stack of unread letters waits for morning. You reach Elizabeth's private chamber. You don't enter. You simply stand outside, knowing she's there, surrounded by ink-stained papers and half-dreamed poems. The scent of lavender, rosemary, and beeswax fills the corridor. Familiar now, like the end of a long story you didn't expect to care about so deeply. You lean against the stone, feeling the chill. Somewhere, a bell chimes softly. Not urgent juice, reminding the night that time still moves, even when we rest. You've walked through courtly schemes, royal tempers, and quiet heartbreaks. You've seen the weight of a crown not worn lightly, but deliberately. Let your shoulders drop. Let the tension melt. Let the quiet hold you. Elizabeth still reigns, but you're lucky you get to sleep. And tomorrow, the world will keep spinning, with or without a crown. So breathe, settle in, let go. The story's over. The night is long, and you're finally home.